Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, Lick Diamonds, back again. Got my boy Brandon, Black Pelican Custom Rods. What's up, brother?
What's going on? Nice to be back.
Yeah, speaking of that, if you guys missed Brandon's first appearance on here, dude reaches out to me about some custom rods. Our boy Tony has been slaying some pretty big fish, and he's like, man, this is the best rod I've ever used. And anytime I hear someone say that, I'm like, but when Tony says it, I'm like, all right, let me give a little attention. And we had you on, you absolutely nailed it. And the whole podcast was about, and you shared a lot of just how to go out there and build your own rods. And that was a really popular one. And today we're going to talk about why rods break. And here's kind of like a big misconception. It's usually not the fish. Yeah, the fish is like kind of the tipping point. A lot of people said, man, I wasn't even high sticking. How did my rod just snap on this, small redfish or trout or whatever it was? And so many times it's from a small little fracture that happens either in transport or sitting in the back of your tailgate. It could be happening even when you're running and gunning. If you have them improperly stowed in your rod holders, there's a ton of different things that happen that most of us have no idea about. So brought Brandon on to talk all about how to make sure you're not snapping your rods. Because I've seen a ton of it. And I think a lot of it, Brandon, is just like this summer with COVID and everything, there's just been more people than ever fishing. But I have seen so many pictures and posts from people in our Facebook group and even our Insider Club saying, man, I just broke another rod. I don't know what happened. And so I was like, we gotta talk about this, because I have a feeling it's a lot of improper transportation and transit issues.
Oh, absolutely. That's probably about 95% of them, whether it be misuse or abuse, whether you know it or not. A lot of it's actually unknowingly abuse. The knowingly stuff is, the squirrel's trying to steal your tomatoes and you want to smack it off your tomato cage, or maybe.
Where do you live, dude?
The better one is, when you go to the beach at 7:00 in the morning and you got trucks lined up everywhere and your dog decides to lock the door and the alarm goes off with your keys inside the truck and you got to dig the keys out of the truck through a crack in the window. That's always a fun one, So you get a break by that.
That's happened to you before.
Yeah, happened once. But we'll start with the least likely is manufacturer defects. Anything in production, you're going to have some stuff slip through the cracks here and there, whether it wasn't produced properly or this is very, very minimal. There's usually a good factor of catching that in QC and everything. One thing you'll know is very fast. So the first couple times you're out there, it's going to have a failure, or it's not going to be like a year down the road, all of a sudden it's going to fail and be a manufacturer defect. It's usually pretty quick. There's no real wave of
meaning like your first trip out. Basically, you're gonna.
It could be your first, second, third, fourth. It's in a short amount of range.
Okay.
So there's always it's a very low percentage. It doesn't usually happen, but anything that's produced a product can have a failure point as far as production goes. There's no real way of avoiding it, so it's not really one to really worry about too much. The other stuff is what you can do yourself to prevent it. I guess one of the bigger ones is high sticking. So high sticking is when that rod takes it past that 90-degree mark. You can do it to certain rods. They will take a high stick. You don't want to put yourself in that position because the carbon will fail eventually. One way to avoid it, obviously, is keep the rod at 90 degrees or less, where it's going to be in your power zone anyway, so you're going to be better off fighting a fish. Once it goes past that mark, you're really putting a lot of stress on the rod and doing more work than is necessary.
Yeah, so explain that, because I fished with people before that just, I assume people know that, and they're like, I've never even heard of that. They just assume you go up as high as you can. Kind of just really describe what like high sticking is and what that's doing to the actual rod when you're fighting a fish.
So when you go to high stick, it's either on the hook set or when the fish is when you're playing that fish and it starts running towards you, people want to throw it up in the air real high and kind of point it to the sky. Yep. It puts a lot of pressure in the midsection of the rod. The rod is a tool also with the line and the reel to all-in-one encompass and help play a fish. high sticking. I've seen a lot with snags too. Somebody trying to yank that snag out and they're ripping the rod real hard. You never want to, release a snag like that. I always keep my stuff like perfectly straight, and I'll grab the line and kind of come at you so the line takes the stress and not the rod at all. Snags are a big thing with fractures doing high sticking and stuff like that. The one thing you got to watch too is when you get more and more into like the boats and stuff, kayaks don't seem to have too much of a problem with this. Or if a fish is running at you and you're taking that line back and he wants to go underneath the boat, I see that a lot where the rod wants to wrap underneath because you have to be kind of quick on it to try to swing the rod around so you're not at a complete 180-degree bend. That kind of plays with experience, I would assume. The more predictable the fish is going to run, the better you can position yourself to take that run.
So let's talk about one that I see probably more than anything else, and my own brother has been guilty, and I try to bust him on it. And it when you pass by a truck and all you see at the very end of the tailgate are 3, 4, 5, 6 rods. You see just the the tip, maybe 5, 6 inches, depending on how long the truck bed is. Talk about that, because we all know what happens right in the bed of a truck, and you can even hear it. Many times you hit every little bump and you hear that just slapping of your rods on the back of that tailgate. Talk about like what that does. I think so many people are guilty of this and yet don't have any idea that they're potentially pre-breaking the rods, if you will.
Right. So that's type of an impact fracture. So if you're going down the road in a truck and you leave those rods sticking out, like leaning against the tailgate, even laying in the back of the truck, even if it's not sticking out, just laying flat, the back of a truck bed, they're violent back there when you're going down the road. You're hitting bumps and it's kind of moving around. Everything's moving. So what's happening is the rod's smacking and clacking against that tailgate or the bed of the truck itself. Doing that over and over and over again might not break the rod right away, but what it does is it puts these little imperfections in the carbon where it kind of depresses. And you could take it out one time, 10 times, 20 times later, that rod could fail because, you tend to see them in the high section of the rod, from halfway up towards the tip is where they stick out. Now there's some ways you can transport a little bit better. Also with like surf rod racks, same principle. And also with boats. If you go down, if you're taking your boat down, you have rod holders spaced out. Sometimes you'll notice the rods clacking together, like if you're hitting bumps and wakes and all that stuff. If you space out the rod holders a little bit further so the rods don't touch each other, that's another thing with the surf rack, same principle. The rods are here, but you're moving, so the rods want to flex a certain way. And when you're hitting bumps and all that, the rods will clack together, and that'll also create another type of impact fracture where it might not be immediate, but you're gonna compromise the matrix of the carbon, and eventually it will fail. While we're on that, you're talking about unrigging rods. Never ever transport a rod while moving with lead on it, any type of sinker or anything, because that'll smack right into it. That will create these little tiny microfractures basically, and eventually cause it to fail. There's some ways to get around it. As far as transporting rods, you can make up homemade tubes if you want to out of PVC. I use a 4-inch sewer and drain tube, which I ship my rods in. It's a little bit lighter. It's a little bit thinner walled than Schedule 40. It's not heavy. Do a little protection with pool noodles. That's a great way to do it. And if you don't want to go that route of, transporting rods in actual travel rod tubes or something like that, but you always want to protect the rod in transport. I think that is probably the majority of failures without it. You go to set the hook and you blast it into something or, something like that. It's these little things as time progresses when it eventually ends up failing.
Yep. Do you have one of those tubes there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to see it.
Actually, this is a little section I made up, but this is basically, it's just a 4-inch sewer and drain tube, and on the end, I just put a little bit of bubble wrap with duct tape just to hold it. And then when you place the rod in, you can get a dollar store pool noodle and cut it up, and there's a little bit of bubble wrap on the end. And when you just slide the rod tip in, you put one in the midsection, one in the back. So, and you put it all the way up against the end, so it doesn't want to move. So you don't want that stuff sliding around there. And you can even just, at the end of it, where you cut the tube right by your reel, you can even put like 2 little holes, maybe some paracord or something, just to hold that reel tight to the actual end of the tube. So that way, when you're moving down the road, you're not having that rod smack all over the place. It's kind of protected. Rod racks are okay for short distances. Like I wouldn't drive hours with the rod sticking out, because then you got road debris, you got rocks kicking up off of trucks, you have bugs, but for short distances, they're fine as long as the tubes are spaced properly.
Cool. And so for those listening on the podcast, you essentially, what is that? How was that? 6 inches or so of a pool noodle? He's basically cut off the top of a pool noodle, put some bubble wrap at the top, and then just duct taped it. Right? Is that really what it was? You duct taped the top?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You just put some bubble wrap on the end and some duct tape. That's just so when it's in there, the actual tip top is not smacking against the end of anything. And then on the tube itself, you have another section of bubble wrap, just an inch thick maybe, just so that way if it does move at all, it's got some protection. It's not banging into something very hard.
So is it, I'm guessing it's obviously towards the top, but where's the section? Is there a certain part of a rod that's most likely to break that you've seen over the years that just seems to always be in one little area? Or is it around guides? Like what's the main culprit?
The majority of the breaks, I'd say it would be from the half section of the rod up towards the top end, like a fast action. When you get it down low, that's more of an overload fracture where you're putting too much stress on the rod itself. And it's kind of out trying to perform what it's based on to do. Drag settings are too high. You got the drags maxed out and that rod's really cranked over. A lot of overload fractures in the lower half of the rod. The majority of them will be from that mid to top where the wall is thinner, the rod itself is thinner. So from halfway up to the tip is where you want to probably focus most of your energy on trying to protect that.
Cool. I will say you mentioned the weights. I've seen so many people do it. I've even seen full-time guides do it. So don't always copy what the guides are doing, because some of these guys, they're getting tons of free rods every single year from their sponsors, and not to say they're irresponsible, but they're running a gun and they're trying to go as fast as they can. And it's okay if they break a rod, they don't lose any sleep over it. But right. I've seen it. If you have, whether it be a half ounce weight or a 1 ounce weight, all of a sudden banging against any rod, even if you're just going half a mile, you can hear it, right? You guys know that feeling if you've been on a boat and someone is basically you still got the full rig on there, so you got to hook down at the bottom and that weight is just sitting there slamming against it. I'd rather put a little dimple in my reel than have that slamming against the rod. I'd rather wrap it down and have the hook go back up into a guide. But what do? Do you completely take off the entire rig every time if you're moving in a, let's just say, a mile or 2 or more?
Yeah. So if on the inshore side, on the boats and stuff, you can get that, if you're using paddle tails or, any type of this poppet course, you can get the hook and the weight down towards the reel more so it's away from the blank. As far as the surf stuff goes, you always de-rig it, always. The beach is very bumpy if you can drive on the beach. Roads are very bumpy. The lead will absolutely just kill a rod blank. Like you said, you hear it and just, it doesn't sound that good. So, but the other thing, I took it to a whole other thought about it too, is even just the bare hook. So for example, you have a high-low rig, if it's de-rigged and you have the hooks blowing through the wind, smacking on that rod blank over and over and over in the same spot. Does it cause failures? I don't know, but I don't think I'd really want to find out.
So anything that's just even a small little hook, just constant banging can cause fractures.
Yeah, it won't be an instantaneous thing, but
sure.
If you just think about it, just that little piece of metal smacking a piece of carbon over and over and over, blowing through the wind in the same spot, eventually it could probably make it fail. So I just completely de-rig it. In the surf stuff, I use a lot of snaps up high. So de-rigging is very easy. Just de-rig it, pull the snap down towards the reel or any type of keeper like that. So it's just a line through the air when you're traveling. No rigs, no lures, pull them all off.
Yep. I had a friend, we'll call him Joe. That's I'm real close with, and I broke a rod, and I was so mad because it was still a fairly new rod, but it wasn't in the first 5 or 6 times using it, but it was still a new rod. And it was a high end rod. And it broke up towards the top, and like it shouldn't have broken in that situation. I was getting real mad, And then I went back, I was like, you know what? It was only like a week ago, maybe even less, that I was moving around in my office, and guess what I hit? You might even see it right here behind me. For you guys
Yep.
watching, hit the old ceiling fan. You can see all, rods behind me there, and that's where it happened. And I think that's probably one of the bigger culprits. And at the time, it boom, 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 boom. It's annoying. You're like, oh my gosh, and you check it, and it's still there. It's still intact. It doesn't look fractured. But talk about that, right? I mean, you can't see these little small fractures in a carbon rod. Like you're not going to be able to visually see them if it's small, or can you?
You can, to an extent.
Okay.
Ceiling fans, car doors are big ones. Tailgates, that's another huge one. Not so much it breaks and snaps right away. So if you have the rod sticking out of the truck and it's kind of the tips hanging out, or you have it leaning up against the tailgate and you're talking to your friend about the great fish you just caught and you're not paying attention, it's basically an awareness thing. You just have to know where it's at all times. Pay attention to it. So if you're talking about the great fish you caught and all of a sudden you shut that tailgate and the rod tips in there, it's gone. And to a different extent, if it doesn't break, you may see a dent. There's some rods, for example, a lot of these have a texturing finish to them, where it's almost acts as like an armor. You may not specifically see a fracture with your eye. It could happen internally. It could break down the composition, or the composite, the graphite. So watch the ceiling fans. they're a big one. Garage doors,
Yep.
Even the corners of ceilings. If you're messing around with your rods and you have a 7-foot rod and all of a sudden you grab a 9-footer and you go to move and jam it up in the ceiling, that's another thing that can cause it too.
And even kids sometimes.
Oh yeah, they're a big one.
So let's talk about material. Is there a certain type of material that's more likely to break or have issues, or is there a material that might be less expensive, but will or won't last? I have no idea about the different types of materials and which ones predominantly last longer, et cetera.
Right. So traditionally, you have the two different types. You have glass and carbon, which both have their benefits. Glass is a little bit stronger, can stretch a little bit better. Carbon is better performing. Then you have some blends where it has glass and carbon. The materials, carbon is naturally brittle by nature, so you really have to take a lot of care to protect the rods from a lot of those things we were talking about with the impacts and stuff like that. For the most part, if you just be aware of where the rod is and it's not smacking into stuff, it should last you a very long time. The enhancements of glass, outer coverings, sort of like Techstream, or I know there's a few other companies that have a similar style of outer wrap. It kind of acts as a protectant to the blank itself. So if it does get banged or nicked, the covering takes that punishment and not the actual blank itself. Now, if it gets too deep and it gets into the blank, that's when you have issues. Then you add materials like graphene to help with the stretch. It helps that carbon stretch out and kind of doesn't make it as brittle as it naturally is.
So what about this rod here? I know that thing looks awesome, by the way.
Thanks.
For those of you can't see it. That's which one is that?
So this is the Weapon by Century.
Weapon, okay.
So it is a full carbon rod with a blend of S2 aerospace glass, as integrated graphene resins and a nano resin tip. So it makes very, very structural, dense rod. It creates an immense amount of stretch. The sensitivity is through the roof with the addition of the glass and the autoclave process. How you get into the processing of the carbon itself, making it extremely dense. It's definitely a weapon. Just put it that way.
You've had some pretty big fish landed on that.
Yeah, Tony loves it. He goes nuts over it. So I'll take his word for it.
Yeah, that's cool. So like, what do you do that's different from a lot of these companies? Because I bought some rods, online, and I'm fine with that. I know you shipped one to me before as well, and I noticed your packing, not just the tip, but the entire packing was like light years ahead of other rods that I've purchased online. And some of them, it's like literally just one of those, $6 little crummy tubes, and there's nothing. There might be a little bit of paper in there, and that's it. And
Right.
I'm like, well, no wonder these things are getting snapped in transit, because the UPS guys, it's almost like they have a contest to see who can launch these things the farthest, right? I mean,
Yeah, let's just say I worked for a shipping company for a very long time. So I take a lot of care to pack the rods. I know how they should be packed. There should be no movement in there whatsoever, because things do happen, um, in transit, whether it be truck, human, whatever. They can jostle around in the tubes themselves, and you could have some issues there possibly. Broken rod tips, if it's, the rod can move inside the tube, and it gets, it falls off steps or something, and the rod tip smacks in the end, it could break. So I just take a little extra care. That's why I use the PVC tubing, bubble wrap, get it in there really tighten out, even throw a little bit of duct tape in there just to make sure that rod does not move at all, no matter how tight it is stuffed in there. Just for the fact that you don't want to purchase a rod and have it show up, and then all of a sudden your one piece is a 3-piece
or 2-piece. Yeah. And let's talk about rod repair too, because that's also come up. I've seen that in the questions is, all right, I have this issue, whether it be under warranty or not. Let's assume it's not. It's a 2-year-old rod. It's out of warranty. Where do you get it repaired? What are mistakes that people aren't aware of? What are some words of advice on rod repair?
You can find a local builder. They're usually very good at being able to decipher what portion of the rod where it breaks. If it's too deep down the action, there's really no saving it too much. That's not really something you want to get into. You're changing the action, you're changing the you're changing a lot of different stuff. You're changing the dynamics of the actual design of the rod. You're pushing, the tip should be at one point, you're taking that down 12 inches down. You just turn that fast rod into an extra fast that just ramp the power up, because it's going to take a lot more pressure to bend that much further down the rod than it would from the tip section. A couple of my personal rods, that one where I had to retrieve keys out of the truck while the door's locked with the alarm going off because the dog set it off. I did break the rod tip on it. So it broke back enough, just 2 or 3 inches, where I was able to actually cut the fracture completely out of it and, find how far it went down. I re-tipped it. So the rod works. I was able to save it because it was a brand new built rod. I only cast it 10 times and I didn't want to lose it. So it just changed it a little bit. Any local builder, they can take a look at it and really decipher what needs to be done.
Cool. And let's talk about cheap rods versus high end, the custom ones. Do yours last longer, or like in general, like should they, or is it more about just getting that custom rod that's literally going to fit your exact reel and how you like to hold it, etc.?
It's a little bit of both. You can take some components and some blanks and get on the higher end of the spectrum as far as performance and stuff like that. They should last a little bit longer. I would stay, if you're going to go custom, I would go on the higher end, just for the fact that you'll get exactly what you want. It'll be tailor fit to you. It kind of gives you just a better overall feel of the rod also.
Yeah, and it looks pretty awesome.
Thanks.
You got any other ones there handy?
Yeah, I do have.
Last time you had a ton laying around. Who do you get them?
Yeah, another one. This is the set going to somebody. He's getting both of them.
Oh, that's sharp, man.
So everything I'm using is pretty much Fuji Tours Light guides now. It's, they are phenomenal guides.
Can you even get them with all this COVID stuff? I know just getting rod components have been crazy tough here.
Yeah, it's been spotty.
Yeah.
It's been very spotty. It'll come in a wave, and then it kind of dries up again. But I saw pictures. I haven't been to an actual store in I don't know how long, but I saw just shelves cleared out. There's no rods, no reels, no line, no nothing.
Yep.
So, but I got just enough, I guess, at the right time where I was able to be okay. But yeah, everything with the stuff going on, kind of just the whole supply chain just got all messed up.
Yep. Talk about that extra layer. I'm curious. You'd mentioned kind of this extra wrap layer
Yeah.
armor. You called it. What is that?
So for these, it's a spread toe reinforcement fabric called Textreme.
Okay.
It's adhered to the blank itself, and it's a little bit more than just the armor. So it gives it a little bit more protection to the rod blank itself, but it changes the dynamics of the rod as far as tip recovery. It does ramp up the power a little bit as far as strength. It's really a pretty phenomenal material. They use it in bikes, surfboards. I think a lot of like race cars, like high end race cars, like the European style race cars. They use it for recovery speed of the carbon. So when the carbon flexes, it wants to come back to zero. It takes a set amount of time to get back to zero. With the Textreme added to it, it's much faster to get back to zero. That's why the rods, they feel very snappy. So you don't have that wobble if you like smack the rod button. It's got a little bit of wobble to it. The Textreme dramatically ramps up the tip recovery and the speed recovery of the carbon. So it's almost like spring-like. It's very snappy. And then you get the added benefit of it's just one extra layer. So if something does happen where you bang into something by accident, it's just a little bit sensitive to security. That doesn't mean, go swinging for the fences with it, but it does take a little bit more to get through there.
Now, what about mismatching your rod in your reel? Meaning going too heavy of a reel, just too heavy duty, too big of a jig or weight. How bad is that in terms of breaking rods? Is that common? 'Cause I know people have mentioned that. What are your thoughts?
So overloads can happen when, if you're too set up with too big of a reel. I mean, that's not too big of a deal as long as your drag setting's right. So if you have, say a Shimano Stella that has an immense amount of drag to it, and you have that thing cranked down on a 20-pound rod and say 30-pound line, you're way overkill for that rod. There's a big chance of overload there. And casting weights, that can be an effect too, to where rod ratings are kind of, tailored to people that, what they feel. There's no real set standard for rod ratings. But if it's rated,
there's also a reason that rods have ratings.
Oh, sure. Yeah. To keep it in a perspective window, so you're not going past that window. So for example, I'm not taking a small graphite trout rod and trying to sling 2 ounces with it. If it's not, if it's only rated to say a half ounce or 3/4 of an ounce, it's going to create way too much pressure in the rod, and you'll create an overload fracture. Typically, overload fractures, you can tell them because when they break, the underside of the rod where the load is flares in. You see a lot of those, like I said, deep down into the rod when you have, say, a drag setting way too high for the actual rod itself, and not so much a high stick, but there's just too much pressure in the body. It's not meant to take that much load in that design. So smaller diameter rods, the heavier offshore stuff, I mean, it's just phenomenal what they do with those rods. You can lift tanks off the floors,
Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with those specs, like, do you personally ever go over even slightly, or is it something that you should try to stay in?
No, you should probably try to stay in it. Most rod ratings are right around where you should be. I have me personally, I have specific rods set up for that. So if I'm eclipsing that 1 ounce mark, I'll switch over to the next model, and I kind of have a few set in the ranges I need to be at, and I won't try to push one rod too hard. That's the other thing with casting too, is I've seen if you get snug up, like a good snag on fly rods, if you have weighted flies, when that thing comes out and it comes shooting back at you, if that, even on the cast, if you have too tight of a loop and that lure drops down, or that fly drops down, that weighted fly, and smacks into the rod, that's I don't know why it just reminded me of that, but that goes back into the impacts on the blanks themselves.
Yeah. Crazy, man. This has been helpful. Any other common mistakes that you're seeing people do with their rods?
Yeah, it's really just awareness, just being aware. everybody's got so much on their minds and everything going on. You just gotta, you work hard for what you want, and when you get it, you don't want to kind of abuse it to take and get a failure out of it. So it's just being aware, not having the rod smack into things, keeping that rod tip down and not having that thing high stick too much, and just outfitting the rod for what you need to be done. So if you have a trout rod, you're not trying to go bluefin tuna fishing.
Yep. Do you use those sleeves at all? Those rod sleeves? A lot of the bass guys use them.
Yeah, I have a few. That's another good way to use them. I saw the neoprene ones are pretty nice. I've seen a couple neoprene ones. They're that helps really protect from weather too. That's the other thing was, rod care and like putting it away dirty, clean it up. I don't know how much that has an effect to it, but give it a once over with the hose and a little toothbrush and the guys or something real quick when you're done. It doesn't have to be done every single time, but if you're out there for a week and at the end of the week clean it up, don't let that, because salt water is extremely corrosive. So
yeah, it'll
really put more of a toll than needs to be taken on the rod. So just taking care of them. I really think that transporting, and that's probably the biggest factor of unknown failures, is a rod it just broke. I don't know how it broke. It was a 2-pound fish. Well, chances are it was smacked into something, it was bouncing on something, and just eventually over time it decided to fail. Rod tubes are great, rod racks are great, spaced properly. That's pretty much it.
Cool. Yeah, I found I had one of those sleeves, and it was I don't know what material that would be, but it was almost like I was having to push the rod up like way too hard to even like get it all the way through. And I was like, man, I'm gonna end up breaking the tip. I was like, this is more dangerous than me just carrying it with my crazy kids in the back.
Yeah.
So I ended up just never using it again. And but it's interesting. So I didn't know about the neoprene ones.
Yeah, they're pretty sturdy, and they usually have some sort of paracord or like a cinch knot, so it kind of goes over your reel stem, and you can just cinch it up tight. Another good thing too I looked into was for SUVs, you have those overhead straps that go in the driver passenger side and in the back, so you can lay the rods on the straps and kind of strap them in, so they kind of move, and they're kind of suspended off the floor and everything. But with little kids, they might want to reach up and go fishing while you're driving.
Yeah. But you're saying just like one on each side kind of a thing, like just hanging from that little clip? Like,
yeah. I've seen them where they go from the driver's side doesn't have a hook for your suits and all that stuff, or dry cleaning stuff, but they have them where they can go from either side, a passenger and driver, and then in the back you can hook them on. It's basically just like a webbing of a strap with kind of little Velcro latches to go over it, so you can lay the rods up on top and just Velcro them on.
Got it.
But they seem pretty good for SUVs, so you can keep them inside the vehicle without laying them on the floor or something like that. There's other ways to do it. I kind of like the homemade stuff. So if you're handy, you can go to Home Depot or Lowe's and get one of those tubes or 10-foot sections for like $8 and a saw, drill, and some bubble wrap, and you got your own homemade tubes.
Heck yeah. And I know there was one group that was making, it was a rod transport holder, but it was almost like a roof rack, but your rods were sticking out the front. And I was like, that can't be good. Like, I mean, because I've heard what's happening to my windshield on the highway.
Yeah.
All it takes is that one rock that shoots up, and then boom. What are your? I know you mentioned like on the the beach. I'm envisioning the beach fishing ones that are like up at the front and the grill that are sticking up. Same deal, right? Like you said, great if you're just cruising along the beach at 5, 10, 15 miles an hour, but different ball game when you're on a highway.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That I absolutely have that closed off. I wouldn't want anything exposed, especially when you're driving up and down, say 95. There's all kinds of stuff that comes off that highway, and you might not know it, but even when you go to pass somebody, something kicks off the tire, and like you said, you hear the windshield, or you just look at the front of your truck or car.
So loud.
Yeah, the bugs. I've seen the bugs in Florida.
Yep.
I don't know how much that has an effect, but I don't want to clean those bugs off.
It's true.
But the overhead rods, you could put them on those like the ski racks. I've seen those where they look like travel rod tubes.
Yep.
I'm not sure if they have them. I didn't really look too deep into it, but I'm not sure if they really have them where the reels stay attached. I've always seen them where you break everything down and transport them. that's why, long distance, where a lot of people long distance traveling will do that. They'll actually put them in the tubes and keep them above the vehicle. And then wherever they get to their destination, they just re-rig. It really is beneficial to take that little extra time to de-rig the rods and keep them protected, even though, it's not just throwing it in the back and going. It really is worth taking a little extra step just to help the longevity of the rods.
It's good, man. Well, this has been super helpful. I know this will be helpful to a lot of anglers who I have seen recently just having to deal with this. And I think a lot of them were just scratching their head saying, how did this possibly happen? I was, fighting a small little bass. I mean, it's just been some very unique ones. It was like that had to have been some type of fracture in the rod from something previous. So this is it's been good.
There's actually one more that I just remembered was a type of shear fracture. A lot of this happens on piers. So you're leaning the rod up against the pier and only say a little bit of the rod sticking up and over, and if it's anchored up in. Now a shear fracture happens when you stop the momentum of the rod. So rods are designed to bend from tip to butt in some way, shape, or form. The energy is supposed to be moving up and down the rod. So if you grab, say, I see a lot of bass guys do this when they boat flip bass, they grab the midsection of the rod and lift them up into the boat. That can create a shear fracture, because what you're doing is you're stopping that energy and basically holding, and you're shortening that 7-foot rod down to a 3-foot rod. It's not designed to take that much pressure in that little bit section of rod. I've actually seen one break on a pier that was leaning up against the railing, and the drag was set pretty hard. And when that fish hit that and ran, that tip bent, took full amount of pressure in that rod tip, and it just sheared right off. Wow. It was a complete shear. So don't lean your rods up against railings, concrete barriers, abrasions, little tiny nicks, abrasions as far as like concrete, wood even. That can over time eventually wear down the matrix of the carbon and eventually cause it to fail.
Cool, man. Good stuff, brother. Well, tell everyone where they can go find out more about you and order some rods.
So you can find me on Instagram at Black Pelican Custom Rods, Facebook, the same page name. My website is bpcrods.com or blackpelicancustomrods.com. I'm here building pretty much nonstop. I have a full-time job, so I'm doing that in between, and I'm doing this as a part-time, full-time job now. So we have some awesome stuff going on. Great builds, great content, and here to answer any questions as necessary.
Yeah, super helpful. Does really great work. I know we've had a ton of our members have purchased some custom rods, and a few people have got quite a few rods from you. They keep coming back. Yeah. That said something. So
yeah, I just want to give a shout out to everybody in the community, members, non-members. It's been really awesome. Even just the messages I got, loving what I'm doing, really excited about it. That little bit when you have a business kind of really gets you going, because you have really, really highs and really, really low lows. Yep. And even just that little bit of stuff, the likes, the comments, how much people love this stuff, it's really good to know. So I'm here to help out.
Yeah, please go follow Brandon and Black Pelican over at Instagram. Help them out any way you can. And obviously keep subscribing to the podcast. Give us a review if you haven't done already. We finally broke through 1,000 reviews, which is something not many podcasts actually do. As crazy as it sounds, when we have, I think we're at 1 million downloads now and only 1,000 reviews. So either a lot of the same people, like my mom, just keep listening over and over again, or just we got people who won't take time to review. So leave us a review. It helps out big time. And other than that, we appreciate you guys, and we will see you on the next episode. We'll put the video, if you're listening in your car or vehicle, you want to see this, we are recording it all, and it'll be at saltstrong.com/podcast. We are out. Peace. Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you, guys.